Hello, everybody. Nice to see a lot of people have showed up. Some of you I know, most of you I don't. So my name is Jos Poortvliet, and I'm going to talk about this community thing. So, well, you already mentioned I describe myself as a people person. That's true. I'm also interested in technology, of course. That's why I'm here. But I studied psychology, and I got involved in the KD community about 2001, 2002, and I found that absolutely fascinating. Also, you know, as a psychologist, all these people doing weird stuff in their free time was very interesting. And I'm somebody who really believes in open. During my studies, I looked into open innovation, and you know, that was a new buzzword back then. These days, it's already old. I did my internship. I did some research in open innovation. And I did it in my first job as consulting. After that, I went to SUSE, where I worked indeed as community manager. And now I work at ownCloud as community manager. And the third thing you should know about me is that I'm a practical person. I like to get stuff done. I mean, yes, I think the big picture is important, but you shouldn't try to plan the big picture. I mean, you can't really make a plan, I believe at least, on where you will be in 5 years. I mean, there are people who can do that, but most people can't. Just do it in small steps, you know. Try to get stuff done. An example is that in the KD community where I was active in promoting KDE, I introduced Google Docs. Now that's kind of evil, maybe, but we needed to get writing done. And, you know, sending documents to each other was just a pain. And it helped us. We got work done. And luckily, after a while, there came Etherpad, which was, of course, nice and open source. So then we had control over our own documents. But getting stuff done, it's okay to sometimes use something that, you know, might not be, well, it was before Snowden, so at least we didn't know how evil it really was, I guess. So these three are actually also going to be the subject of this talk. So I'm going to start with people and community, what a community is, why it works, how people are in there. And then I'm going to talk about open, what the power is of communities and why it's important to use that power and how you can use it. And last, I'm going to be more practical, and I'm going to simply talk about, you know, how to build a community, how to maintain a community, how to work with this community thing. Now, if you have questions at any point, you can just wave at me. I'll keep looking around. And I'm totally fine being interrupted, so that's cool. It's going to be about 45 minutes, but, you know, give or take. I started a little early. So let's see how it goes. So let's talk about this people thing. Now, I looked up on Wikipedia how they described community, because, you know, Wikipedia is a source of all knowledge, these days at least. And they described it as a social unit of any size that shares common values. So basically, as soon as you're married, you hopefully already share some common values, making you a very little community, which perhaps later on grows. I mean, it's everything. I mean, we're humans. We always want to be part of something. We want to be part of a club, a soccer club. We are already born as part of something, as part of a family. And you work in companies. You're part of a country. You're part of maybe your local municipality, part of the, you know, fire brigade, things like that. So being part of something is very central to how we are as human beings. And these common values that make you part of something from which you derive identity and who you are, they're, well, we call it a group culture. And culture is best described, at least that's how I described it, as a shared understanding of the world that guides behavior. So it's shared, obviously, you look at the world in a certain way, and in each community, each group of people you're part of, you have a certain view of the world, the way you see it. I'll come with a couple of examples later. And this view, this way of looking at the world, this guides your behavior. It makes you do stuff or not do stuff, or do things in a certain way. It's a lot more important than you might think. And Mark Twain said this, I think, in a pretty interesting way. People are different in different places, but the same people can also act different in the same place, just because the setting changes and they're suddenly part of another group of people. Let's talk a little bit about why this is. I'm going to talk about three parts there, three elements to culture. And the first is that you, in a community, you share common interests and common goals. You have something in common. Obviously, you know, when it's about family, the thing you have in common is obviously your genes, right? Or you're born from the same parents, or, well, you decided to get married. But often you also have, you know, common interests. And I kind of find the word interest a little interesting here because it has multiple aspects. I mean, first of all, there's interest. As in, you know, if you have a common interest, you want something, both. You want the same thing. You're interested in the same thing. If the power goes out in this building and we have no more Wi-Fi, we probably want the power and Wi-Fi back, so we all have a common interest in doing that. And maybe we will then do something together to make that happen. That's one of these things that make people a community, that puts them together, make them do things. And the other thing about interests is that, I mean, if you're interested in something or someone, it engages you, or you want to have it, or play with it, or use it. And so, interested in something is another element of this word. And last is kind of the other way around. In English, when you know, had an experience that was, well, maybe not entirely awesome, you sometimes say, well, you know, it was kind of interesting, but not necessarily good, because it was different. So there's also perhaps sometimes a negative side to the word, to interests. It doesn't always put you together. I think that people are still different, even when you're part of one community, one group. So that's the first part of what it is to be culture, well, to be community. The second thing is this common story, this shared view of the world that I mentioned before. And this often goes through stories about where you come from. And for example, countries have stories about how they came into being, you know, often through old wars. But the interesting thing is that if you look at a country that they have the war with, those people have a very different story. It's about the same thing. And these stories, they bind those both people together and separates them at the same time because they have a different story. I actually thought this morning while watching some news that it would be rather interesting if a story like, for example, what's going on between, well, let's say Northern Europe and Southern Europe right now, you know, with our economic difficulties, let's say Germany and Greece. It would be rather interesting if the German news would occasionally be replaced with the Greek news and the other way around in both countries. Because in theory, they're both reporting on the same thing, but I'm pretty sure that if you would switch around the news reporting, you know, let the Greek reporters make the German news for a week and the other way around, people would get a pretty different view on the issue. I mean, these are, you know, things shaping our view on the world, and that binds us together again. It's how we look at things. They often say the winner writes history. That's another part of that. But this goes deeper than just, you know, how you look at things. It really shapes your view on the world and how you act. They did some interesting experiments where they put people in front of a fish tank and asked them to describe what was happening in a fish tank. Now, the fish tank had big fish and small fish and, you know, some stuff in it, plants and, you know, one of these little, you know, palaces that they put in fish tanks. And then they asked first a group of Americans to describe what was happening in the fish tank. And the Americans, they start with the big fish. Those are the big fish, they're important, right? So they described what the big fish were doing. And then they asked a group of Japanese people to describe the same fish tank. And Japanese people start with the small fish. And they start with the environment, with the little castle and, you know, the plants. I mean, why would they do that? Because they have a different view of the world. That's shaped by your culture, by how you grow up and what people tell you when you're a kid, what's important, the stories you hear about important things. And we read stories of, well, Hansel and Gretel, I think as the German names. They made movies out of it, so I'm sure you guys are aware of it, even if you don't have it locally. You know, I'm sure they have very different stories in Japan. And these stories shape how you look at the world. Yeah, and this goes really even deeper than that. They did two interesting other experiments I want to talk about. So one was about smell. They asked people from different cultures to describe certain smells. Now, it turns out Americans were not very good at differentiating between different smells. On average, they could name only half the smells. And we're talking about very distinct smells like cinnamon, which is something you must know because, you know, you encounter it all the time. and seaweed, that's a very typical salty smell. They also found groups of people who could identify smell so precise that they could name an element of a smell that was common between bat feces, shit, and a certain flower. So they couldn't just name the smell in itself and say, oh, but that's from that flower. They could say, well, this flower has a certain hint to it that is the same as in that, bat shit. Crazy, I think. So these things go really deep. They influence how we even see and feel and hear. Lots of interesting experiments have been done with this. Let me give another example. Sound. We describe usually a sound that goes up, and in terms of going down. Sounds go up, sounds go down. There's a high note, this is a low note. But there are cultures where they describe sounds in terms of thick and thin. Okay, what effect does it have on you? Well, they did an experiment where they put people in front of a computer screen, and then they asked them to reproduce a note that they would hear. So they would hear a certain note, and then they had to sing it. Now, if they showed a bar on the screen that would be going down, then people had trouble to keep a high note. They would sing it too low. And if the bar on the screen would be going up, these people would be singing the note too high. So you're influenced by what you see. Interestingly, of course, the people who described sounds as thick and thin were not influenced by the bar at all. They would just reproduce the note exactly the same way. But, and I'm sure you feel it coming, when they would show a thick or a thin note, okay, I should have turned that off, give me a second. When they would show a thick or a thin line, you can imagine, then suddenly it will go the other way around, and they would be influenced by that, but not by the lowering or raising bar. So this is all about how you're influenced by this view of the world that you share with other people in a community. Be it a country, be it a small group of people, be it a family. Now, all this has an effect on more than just the way you see the world. It also influences how you behave. And there are certain invisible rules that change your behavior depending on what group of people you're with. Think about personal hygiene. With most people, it would be the case that if you don't shower very often, you will not be invited to parties anymore, because, you smell, right? But even just, whether you yawn with your hand in front of your mouth or not, it's cultural. Some people find it not a good idea to not do that, and, you get other people frowning at you if you don't put your hand in front of your mouth while you yawn, and you will learn pretty quickly not to do that anymore. It's not like that rule is written down anywhere, but you'll notice when you need to, change. These things happen automatic. Another nice example is that this becomes very visible when you move between one country and another, especially if you cross continents, of course. And my wife's from Brazil, and when she got a job in Germany, she told me that, on the first day, she was, walked through the office quick and then put at her desk. And then she had the day for herself, alone. And at the end of the day, she went home. Now, that seems rather normal to me. That's what happened to me at pretty much every job I've ever had. But for her, that was weird, because in Brazil, every single person in the office will come to you, and they will all say, hi, how are you? My name is XYZ. I do this. If you have any questions, please tell me. And in the evening, you will all go out together to a bar, drink some beer, eat something, and get to know each other. Because, you're new, right? People need to welcome you. That's normal. Well, in Germany, they just think, look, it's nice if people get time to find their place. But if you're from Brazil, you think everybody hates you. These are cultural differences, and they're really, really big. Even though you pick them up automatically, you don't even think about them. So, as a community, you have a culture. Each group of people has certain ways, have a common identity, a way they look at the world, common interests and goals, a common story, common rules. Why? Why is it that people work that way? Why do we do this? How does this help? Now, this function or role of culture, this shared identity, it has two benefits. One of them you can probably imagine, it's about collaboration and working together. And the other half is learning. So let's talk about collaboration. Now, if you don't have any shared idea about the world, you can't do anything. And we all know this myth, this Tower of Babel, or Babel, I don't know how you pronounce it. People couldn't build a tower when they lost their language. They couldn't work together anymore. And this is essentially a role of culture. It gives you a shared language, a shared understanding of the world. In the USA, when you meet someone, or when you're at the supermarket and you check out, people say, "Hi, good morning, how are you?" If you do that in Germany, that's bloody rude. It's none of your business. You don't go around, ask strange people how they are. Again, this is a different culture, and this is about how you see each other and yourself and the world. And in a company, for example, you need rules about management, about decision-making, who gets the coffee. It's big things, small things, but you need them to be able to work together as human beings. So that's one benefit of having a common culture and common rules. And the other is because rules and common culture is very central to learning. How do people learn? Well, as an individual, you make a mistake or somebody tells you not to do something and, you don't do it anymore because, it got you in trouble. But how does a group learn? I mean, if people in a group would come and leave, they would keep making the same mistakes again and again. That's not really, a good way of working together. So this is kind of what group culture is about. You learn these stories, you talk to other people, and you find out what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And this is essentially the knowledge that's being encoded into the culture of the group. It's being part of who you are. And even though, maybe you never made the mistake or even heard explicitly about why you do a certain thing, you still do it because, that's how we do things here. They've done interesting experiments with monkeys where they, would hang a banana up and then they put a way to get to the banana. Now, of course, the first time you put the monkeys in there, they run to the banana and then you get a water cannon and you shoot them down. So then they don't do that anymore because that's not fun, right? So what happens when you put a new monkey in there? Well, when that monkey walks to the banana, the other monkeys will grab him and keep him away from it because they don't all want to get wet. The cannon makes everybody wet, so you're not going to grab that banana. So another monkey comes and, goes for the banana and the others grab him and stop him. And you replace all the monkeys one by one. And at some point, there isn't even a single monkey left who was ever made wet because he tried to grab the banana, but they still don't do it. Because they teach each other not to go after the banana. This is group culture. This is what we do. And it also illustrates that, if you at some point turn off the water cannon, they still don't go after the banana. And this is also interesting with humans. Sometimes, we do things for reasons that are no longer relevant. That's learning in a group. So people have a common identity, a common culture, and this helps them with collaboration and learning and being together. This is the people part. This is what culture is. This is what a community is. It's people with a common identity who do things together. Now let's talk about this open thing. What is so valuable about open? Now, open innovation is a buzzword, and so is crowdsourcing, which I'm also going to use. I'm sorry in advance. I know everybody hates buzzwords. But I still need to use them a bit. So, let's talk about those four. If it would be 1990, and you would tell people that the well-known and respected Encyclopedia Britannica would be replaced by a knowledge base that was written by volunteers, they would tell you you had totally lost it. And if you would tell people in the 80s that a bunch of volunteers would write an operating system that would basically take over the world, they would tell you we're insane. Today, I don't even need to talk about these things because these things have happened. It's done. Open has changed the world. Open is more than just volunteers doing stuff in their free time. I mean, Linux is developed by companies. About 80% of the people who work on the Linux kernel are paid to do that. And this is no longer a volunteer-only thing. And it's not always just between volunteers and people working in a completely open community. I mean, Douwe Egberts and Philips got together at some point, and the result was a senseo. They looked across the boundaries of their companies, worked together, and they came up with something that was immensely profitable for both of them. They made really a lot of money on this. And in hindsight, it's not so complicated, but that's how it works. And you can even be open inside a company. 3M is a good example of that. This company has a culture where it's okay to make mistakes or to be associated to projects that went wrong, and that's okay. In most companies, you kind of, you know, if you lead a project and it goes wrong, nobody wants to touch you anymore because, you know, you're bad news, right? It went horribly wrong, cost the company a lot of money, and, you know, this is a guy nobody wants to work with anymore. This is not how 3M works. The result of that is that when they had a big failed project trying to develop a new glue, another researcher found the results interesting and started to play with it. Today, everybody has post-it notes, which came out of a failed project in 3M. They wouldn't have happened if the company wasn't so open about people learning and making mistakes. So open has a very big effect on the world, transformational effect even. So usually this closed way of working, which we had in the 1800s and 1900s, companies did that because they had limited resources. I mean, getting a couple of good people, like really smart people, that was difficult enough. So when you had them, you basically locked them up in a box somewhere and told them to go innovate. That's really how it worked in the 70s and the 60s, and that's no longer the case today. Today, things have changed. I mean, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, companies had vertical integration. As it says here, Ford had rubber plantations to make rubber for the wheels of their cars. And Xerox made their own paper. Well, we all know how well this closed innovation model worked, because, you know, Xerox invented the graphical user interface, and we know who made money with it. It ain't Xerox. So closed innovation has, well, downsides. The world has changed. Education has improved. Everybody these days gets or can get a pretty okay education in most countries in the world. So the reality is, if you're a big company, even if you're a really, really big company, most of the smart people in the world don't work for you. And this is a realization that a lot of companies still have trouble making. They don't work for you. They work for other companies. They do other things. So if you don't work together, you don't get to benefit from all that intelligence, all that creativity. Ideas are cheap. I mean, there are plenty of ideas, interesting things that we could do. I mean, just look on the internet. There are so many crazy ideas. The difficulty is how to make money on them, how to bring these ideas to the market, to turn them into a success. So you don't need to come up with the idea, you just need to be able to turn it into a success and make money with it, or at least, you know, change the world with it. It's execution that's difficult today. So modern day businesses are no longer really about coming up with that brilliant idea and then developing it, but it's about building an ecosystem and letting other companies build on your product and increase the value of the whole thing. It's ecosystems versus ecosystems. And what comes out of that? Well, somebody has a crazy idea, let's turn shipping containers into houses. You know, when you have this internet thing, which is of course a big example of everything that can happen, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's, you know, questionable, but it's happening. And a very simple implementation of this you must have seen here or there. It's the idea box. It's like the most lazy implementation that you can have when you realize that maybe other people have ideas too. Then you put up an idea box and see if they give it to you. Doesn't really work, but for some companies it's already a big deal. And there are a lot of online platforms that are essentially just this. And then people spend time going through it and discover that, you know, this is not the best way of come up with ideas. But it's a start. It's a beginning. Yeah. Other companies try to buy smaller companies because the big company can't innovate. They think, well, if we just buy innovative companies, then we can at least help that get to the market. It's another way of doing it. Can work. Other organizations really get it, like the NASA. A couple of weeks ago, they opened up all their data, so millions of people on the internet can work together and turn that into, well, we don't know. I mean, what are they going to find in all that data? I mean, it's not like most people looked at it, because 99% of all the pictures NASA ever took have never been seen by anyone. There's just no time to watch all of those pictures. Who knows? Yeah? I mean, the New York Times, at some point, got 24,000 emails from Sarah Palin, which were released by the government on paper. Now, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to read all of those and then figure out what's interesting and throw the rest away? That's a lot of work. So what they did is they scanned them, put the scans on the internet, and told people, look, read them. If you find something interesting, let us know. That worked. Thousands of people read them, and within no time they had a couple of quite interesting articles. And that's the power of collaboration, opening up, working together. And of course, we all know Kickstarter and Indiegogo and other crowdsourcing platforms where people come together and take an interesting idea and build something out of it. Does it always work? No, but it does very often. It's pretty interesting. There are many more examples of this. In 2011, there was an outbreak of E. coli, which is a harmless bacteria normally that lives, well, you all have them with you, but it suddenly killed people in Germany. So to find out what went wrong, the scientists released the genetic code that they had, and hundreds, thousands of scientists all around the world looked at it, and they pretty quickly figured out what had changed and what the problem was. That wouldn't have happened so easily if they didn't share this information. Another example is Ebola. Outbreaks are tracked using maps that help people find where the epicenter is and where the disease comes from. So open can save lives in this way very directly. The key is it works. I mean, there are lots of projects, of course, LibreOffice that Sam just talked about is another example. There are hundreds and thousands of examples where opening up stuff and working together on it, it works. It really makes a difference. It's people coming together, and we're back to people now, of course, because together you can really make a difference. If you have any questions, you should ask them. I'm going to move on to the practical stuff now. So I hope that I made pretty clear what community is and how it's powerful and how it can change the world. Now I'm going to talk about how to build one, how to work together with people and, have your own community or be part of one in a better way. No questions? All right. So from all of what I talked about, it should be clear that the key of community is being together. Because then you can build this story and build this, shared understanding of the world. And you need to have things happen to you. Yeah? So common interest and goals is the core of any community. You need to have a story, you need to have something. Build a place, local or online, where you can talk together and just hang together. I mean, if you do it local, just look for a local bar or, a place where you can do a weekly or a monthly meetup. I mean, something like the university, of course. I'm sure there are rooms where you can get together that you can get for a month every now and then. And that's where you can then, sit together, talk to people, discuss, well, whatever the subject is or going to be of your group. And online, there are lots of technologies. I mean, forums, there's GitHub where you can get a lot of work done together. There's Discord, which is also a pretty cool platform to build communities. Lots of good stuff. And then, you need this subject. You need to find something that binds you together and where you can make your community the place to find everything about this. So it can be photography or anything, but you need to then to have information about it. So people come there and interact with the information. It's good to be open and to sometimes work with other people and have stuff that's less than 100% relevant to the subject there. I mean, community is also about people. So when people have different interests, they're different. So it doesn't all have to be focused on the same thing, but it should be around the same subject. Because you need to realize why people would come to you. People, they don't come because, there's this nice community and you can hang out and talk to each other. That's not why you come. You come because there's something interesting. There are people working on cool development boards like Banana Pi or Raspberry Pi. There are people who know a lot about photography, so that's why you go. You're going to stay for the people. You're going to stay for that community. So when you build a community, you need to have these two things. You need to have interesting subjects, something that's cool or interesting, and I mean, just pick the thing, of course, that you find interesting and work on that. But then you need to also make sure that when these people have come and have learned or read or found out what they wanted to find out, that they have something to stay for. You need to create a nice environment where people can be together and have a good time. I mean, think about work. If you have a job, why do you do that work? Well, I am sure you have two reasons. Nice colleagues and interesting work. You need to have them both. Because if your colleagues are all assholes, you're not going to stay long. And if the work is boring, you're not going to stay long either, no matter how good the colleagues are. You need to have both of these elements always. So you need to do interesting stuff. You need to have good content. I mean, if it's online, have blogs, regular news items, how-tos, translate maybe content about, whatever it is. There are lots of photography sites, for example. If you want to build a local one, you can find plenty of content online. So make sure that you have regular news and updates and other things. And when it's local, have good speakers. Speaker quality is very important. So don't get marketing people, but get an engineer or something. If it's about software, get somebody who really knows what they're talking about. That usually works better with more technical people. And meet them in advance, have a talk with them, and see if you can help them make good slides. Avoid death by PowerPoint, because that's, annoying and doesn't really make it very interesting. And maintain a relationship with your speaker so that you can get them to come back when there's something new or interesting. Maybe there's something new released and they can come and talk again about the subject. Give them a coffee occasionally and just have a chat and see if there's something interesting going on. And then on the people side, in your community, be friends, be welcoming. Introduce new people. That you can do that both online and in real life. I mean, not everybody wants to be introduced, so don't make it mandatory. But if people are okay with it, then put them in front of the group, or just say, look, we have 2 new members. What are your names? What do you do? I mean, make it personal and go to people. Send people a personal email if they haven't showed up for a while. Things like that. And when your group grows, pick somebody to do these introductions for you. Just have somebody who is like, I don't know, give it a fancy name, director of communications, fancy names are nice. And then that person can, introduce people and, has it as a responsibility to talk to them frequently. And set up a newsletter, ask for contributions. Do it all directly to people. And then you can grow. Once you have something that's working, a monthly meetup or a website with a couple of people who are active regularly, you can start growing. So advertise it, have a nice website and reports and social media. If you have a local community and newsletter, that also works actually online, of course. And start to pick people, to take care of certain things, as I just said. Pick somebody to introduce people. Make that kind of a public, thing that people know that, it's his or her responsibility to invite people. Or do things like bring a friend, have like an evening where everybody has to try and bring somebody. That kind of stuff can really grow your community a lot. At some point you might be looking for sponsorship, because companies actually, they often want to sponsor these things, both online and offline. If you have a local meetup that's about, I don't know, take even photography, If there are people who come from companies that do something with cameras, obviously their company will be interested. But local companies are often interested, especially if it's about technology. If you have anything around software, a local PHP user group or a local, Ruby group, there will be companies interested in trying to hire people. So talk to them and see if they're willing to sponsor a bit. Have coffee, tea, and cake at the place, sponsored by, local company. And when you do that, try to find multiple sponsors and ask them less frequent but bigger amounts. Because it's equally much work for a company to give you 50 euros than it is to give you 250. But, the 250 helps you a lot more. So try to ask them 250 once a year rather than 50, every quarter. It makes it easier on everybody. Ask people if they know maybe a potential sponsor, things like that. I mean, your sponsors will be happy if you just put their name on the website and just mention them in the meetups or something like that. So they just want to be visible to the people who are there, and they like to support local things often. Yeah? So another interesting thing about communities that you often see is that people start to do, well, interesting stuff. Maybe not always there will be a bake sale, but people make, like paper versions of the logo or postcards, or want to do an origami course. Weird stuff, interesting stuff, people making like, wallpapers out of the logo, that's cool, You should always support that. Like if people try to take, your subject a little further than maybe you would have done yourself, or maybe more than you thought, that's okay. Let go and let people do the crazy stuff with it, because, it's part of being a community. It's a team building thing. People like that. Apparently they're proud of whatever it is you're doing, so let them play with it. And find people to help you out more. I already said, appoint somebody, but there are lots of other tasks that people can do, Ask them directly, and just give them a responsibility, not a specific task, but rather, like let them invite people, and they can do that however they want to do. And when you do it, always make sure that you thank them for it, of course, but that you also leave room when they don't have time for it or can't do it anymore. Leave a way out. I mean, often people feel obliged to do something even when they don't have time. So then they kind of block other people from doing it. We call this cookie licking in open source. They lick the cookie and then they put it back. They don't actually eat it. That's not good. So leave room for people to leave when they don't have time to do something, so that somebody else can step up and do it. And it's also very important to always look at all the core people of your group. There's always a number of people who's really core to a community. And those are the people that you should give some extra attention. Send them a t-shirt if it's online, or, take them out for dinner when it's a local group, Because these are the people who can take over when you go on holiday for a week or a month, or even want to stop. They keep things going, so you should reward them publicly and privately, Talk to them about it and give them responsibility. Don't micromanage them. Just, let them really be responsible for things. Make them part of it. So when you have built a local community, or a community online, it's also important to stay connected with the rest of the world. Like if it's a local community around the Linux distribution, like OpenSUSE or Ubuntu, make sure that you keep an eye on the international news and bring that up as subject frequently. If you have, as I already mentioned, like a local photography group, look at what's happening in the world of photography and share that news with other people. Because this connection with international community often brings in, interesting new things and also keeps things relevant. Because the risk is often that you become a little group of friends and that this interesting element disappears. That there's no reason for people to join anymore because you're all having fun because, you have this community feeling, but you don't have the thing that attracts other people, the interesting subjects. So by connecting with what's happening in the rest of the world, you often bring in new ideas and new interesting stuff, interesting speakers, interesting subjects, and new people come in. That's how you keep growing. And last but not least, if you are building a community or are part of a community, there will always be a moment when it is less than nice. Bad stuff happens. This is almost inevitable. After all, it's people, right? We all know people. When you put a bunch of them together, at some point they're going to disagree about something. So at some point you're going to have bad weather. And it's important to keep things healthy. And the key here is also to be prepared for this. I know it's not really fun to have rules and things like a code of conduct or an anti-harassment policy, but it's really, really important. Get it in place early. Because if you don't have it, at some point you're going to regret it. I promise. You will regret it. So get a simple code of conduct. Get some simple rules on how to deal with a conflict, with a disagreement, with a fight. Keep it simple. Don't make it too detailed, because then you're going to fight about the details. Just have a big picture thing, Like we want people to be nice to each other. And if you make other people feel uncomfortable, you either stop or you leave. That's enough detail. That's clear enough. That's enough to tell people, okay, stop. because you're making other people feel uncomfortable. And you have every right to make these rules. After all, if you build a community, as a community, it's your private place. People often complain about, censorship and stuff like that, but seriously, if you have a private website that you run with a couple of other people and you have a good time there, it's not censorship to kick somebody off, because they can build their own website. Now, you're not blocking them from doing that. They just have to stop poisoning your website. That's a totally valid thing to demand. So keep this in mind. You have every right to interfere and protect the community that you've built. Don't play power games, but seriously, try to keep it fun that way. You're the organizer, you do the work, you decide. This is it. These were all the pictures, if you're interested. Again, are there any questions? Anything else? If not, I'll give the key to Svebor again.
Any questions?
Seems not. All right. Thank you very much.